Every ancient civilization tells the same story, not with the same names, not in the same language, not even with the same details, but the core idea never changes. Before us, there were giants, not gods, not animals, but something closer, something human yet larger, taller than any man alive today, stronger than memory can explain, so immense that entire cultures remembered them long after they were gone. And this is not one myth, but many myths emerging independently across continents that never touched and civilizations that never met. From the ancient Near East, where they were called the Nephilim, described as mighty beings towering over ordinary humans, to the frozen north where Norse legends spoke of the Jötnar, giants who existed before the gods themselves, forces of raw size and chaos, to Native American stories of red-haired giants driven into caves after terrorizing early people, to ancient India where Hindu texts described enormous beings who battled gods, reshaped landscapes, and existed in a distant forgotten age, to Greece where myths remembered the Titans, not monsters but primordial beings of immense stature buried beneath the earth after their fall, stories that did not travel together, that arose separately, in isolation, across thousands of years, and yet all described the same thing: humans, but bigger. And for centuries, scholars dismissed these accounts as exaggeration, symbolism, poetry, metaphors for nature, chaos, and fear of the unknown. An explanation that worked until people started digging. Because in the early modern world, as railroads carved through untouched land and farms expanded into ancient soil, bones came out of the ground, at first seeming ordinary, animal remains, fragments of history, until some did not fit, and newspapers in the 1800s began publishing strange stories from many regions at once, of farmers uncovering skeletons far larger than any living human, graves too long and too wide, skulls thicker than normal, jawbones wider, femurs longer than doctors had ever seen, with reports from Ohio, Wisconsin, Nevada, Kentucky, and New York claiming skeletons 7 feet tall, others 8, a few even more, at a time when archaeology was still young, with no standardized methods, no carbon dating, no modern anatomy references, bones identified by eye, measured by hand, interpreted through assumption, and exaggerated freely by newspapers. Yet what matters is not whether those reports were accurate, but why they resonated so deeply, because people did not react with disbelief but with recognition, as if these discoveries were not shocking but familiar, as if the ground itself was confirming something humans already believed, that giants had once existed. And by the late 1800s, much of the world was obsessed with the idea, museum curators receiving crates of bones, local historians recording burial mounds said to contain oversized remains, amateur archaeologists rushing to excavation sites hoping to find proof, until slowly the story unraveled, and when scientists examined many of these bones carefully, the giants began shrinking. What looked enormous in isolation became ordinary in comparison. 7 feet became 6, 8 feet became tall, but human. Some bones turned out to be mammoths, others bears, some mixtures of multiple skeletons disturbed by time, and many finds vanished entirely, lost to poor documentation, never preserved, thrown away before anyone understood their significance, which is where suspicion took root, because when evidence disappears, imagination fills the gap, leading people to claim the bones were hidden, destroyed, locked away, that the truth about giants was being suppressed. Yet a far more unsettling explanation exists, one that requires no conspiracy, because what people were finding were not giants but outliers, humans living at the extreme edge of biological possibility, forcing us to confront an uncomfortable truth that human size has limits, hard limits. And throughout recorded history, there have been individuals 7 feet tall, 7.5, even over 8 feet, real, documented, measured, but not giants in the mythical sense. Rather, humans with rare medical conditions like gigantism and acromegaly caused by excessive growth hormone during childhood, where bones do not know when to stop growing and the body stretches upward unevenly. Because biology does not scale cleanly, as height increases, the body begins to fail, bones grow longer, but not stronger, joints deteriorate, the heart struggles against gravity, organs strain under mass they were never designed to support, leaving many of the tallest humans in history living lives marked by pain, limited mobility, chronic illness, and early death, a reality legends never mention, because a true giant is not powerful, not dominant, not superior, but fragile. And that fragility reveals a truth myths avoid, that there is a ceiling to human size beyond which strength becomes weakness, meaning that if ancient giants truly existed towering far beyond even the tallest modern humans, they would have faced the same failures: broken bones, cardiac collapse, reduced mobility. And yet stories describe giants as strong, as warriors, as builders capable of reshaping the world, leading to a deeper question. If giants were not simply tall humans with medical conditions, then what were ancient people actually describing? Because legends are not random, they persist because they carry something real, not always literal truth, but remembered experience. And to understand giants, we must stop asking whether they existed exactly as described and start asking why humans everywhere felt compelled to remember them. An answer that does not lie in skeletons alone, but in scale, in perception, in a world far more dangerous than ours, a world where ancient humans lived without cities, electricity, or safety, a world where everything around them was bigger, where for most of human history we were not dominant, not the largest, not the strongest, never at the top of the food chain, but small fragile creatures moving through landscapes ruled by giants. Mammoths towering with shoulders higher than any human could reach, giant ground sloths taller than modern elephants, short-faced bears heavier than cars and faster than horses, saber-toothed cats hunting with terrifying efficiency, even herbivores massive, ancient bison, giant elk with antlers wider than a room, rhinoceroses, dwarfing anything alive today. A world where size meant survival, where ancient people looking at the horizon did not see empty land, but towering shapes moving through mist, felt footfalls shaking the ground, watched shadows pass over valleys, and in that world scale defined memory, because a predator twice your height does not just threaten you, it defines your understanding of power. And in such a reality, encountering something that looked human but was taller, broader, and stronger would not feel impossible at all. It would feel expected, because this is where perception becomes more important than measurement, as ancient humans did not measure height in feet and inches, but in fear, dominance, and survival, where someone taller than everyone else was not simply tall but other, and someone with unusual strength was not just strong but remembered. And memory over time does not shrink, it grows. Because oral traditions do not preserve precision, they preserve impact, turning a tall warrior taller with every retelling, a powerful enemy into something unstoppable, a frightening tribe into something monstrous, until within only a few generations reality stretches into legend, not through deception, but through the natural mechanics of human memory. Yet giants are not remembered only as individuals, but as a race, and that detail matters, because ancient humans did not merely encounter tall people. They encountered entire groups that felt different, with different builds, different behaviors, different ways of living, such as Neanderthals, who were shorter than us but far more robust, or Denisovans whose fragmentary bones suggest massive frames living alongside modern humans in parts of Asia, along with other archaic humans we barely understand. And to early Homo sapiens, these were not other species, but other people, similar yet not the same, capable of feeling threatening simply by existing. And when modern humans encountered these groups, there was competition for land, for food, for survival, and competition breeds myth. Because when one group replaces another, the memory of the defeated rarely survives in neutral form, instead becoming distorted as enemies turn into villains, rivals into monsters, and those who came before into something larger than life, which is how many ancient cultures remember the past, not as timelines, but as struggles, where size becomes symbolic and the old world is remembered as bigger, more dangerous, more extreme, while the new world is smaller, controlled, and ordered, making giants. Symbols of what existed before civilization: chaos before law, wilderness before settlement, nature before dominance, which is why giants are almost always defeated in myth, buried beneath mountains, trapped in caves, cast to the edges of the world, falling violently rather than fading quietly, their collapse becoming the foundation of legend. Yet there is another unsettling layer. Because ancient humans were not only remembering animals or rival groups, but places, caves, mountains, and remote valleys where danger lived and people disappeared. Locations associated with giants not because giants lived there, but because humans feared them. Where someone vanishing into a cave was explained not by collapse or erosion, but by something inside, something large, something waiting. And once that idea took hold, it spread, turning caves into lairs, mountains into forbidden zones, regions into cursed land, making giants guardians of boundaries, warnings encoded into story. Do not go here, do not cross this line, do not forget what happened last time. So in that sense, giants served a purpose as memory made monstrous. Yet memory alone does not explain everything. Because certain details in giant legends are strangely consistent: descriptions of immense strength, weapons too large for normal men, and massive stone structures attributed to giant builders, found across the world, where ancient ruins appeared impossible to the civilizations that encountered them later, with enormous stones, stacked without mortar, blocks weighing dozens of tons, and alignments so precise they felt unnatural, prompting a simple question: who could have built this? And when the answer was not obvious, imagination stepped in and said giants. Not because giants existed, but because scale demanded explanation. Because anything larger than your society could build must have been built by something larger than you. A logic that appears everywhere, from European megaliths to South American walls to Cyclopean Mediterranean stones, where the builders were forgotten but the stones remained. And stones do not shrink with time. They loom, they intimidate, they make the present feel small. And when people feel small, they imagine the past as large, revealing the final piece of the giant puzzle: that giants are not memories of creatures alone, but memories of a world that dwarfed humanity, a world filled with megafauna, rival humans, enduring structures, and untamed landscapes, where humans were not giants, but prey, surviving through cooperation, storytelling, and memory. And the stories they told were not meant to be accurate, but to be remembered, to warn, to explain, to give shape to fear. Meaning giants are not proof of an ancient race, but proof of something deeper: that humans once lived in a world that felt too big to understand. And when that world faded as animals shrank, rivals vanished, and civilization rose, the stories remain, because memory does not adapt as fast as reality. And what we cannot explain, we enlarge. So by the time the modern world began digging seriously into the past, the idea of giants was already ancient, living in myths, religious texts, and folklore passed quietly through generations, until the 18th and 19th centuries changed everything. When humans stopped only telling stories about the past and began uncovering it. As railroads cut through hills, farms expanded into untouched land, burial mounds opened, riverbanks eroded, caves collapsed, and long-buried soil was exposed, causing bones to surface that felt miraculous, like proof of lost civilizations. Yet many of these discoveries were made by untrained farmers, laborers, and local historians without comparative anatomy, standardized measurements, or modern context. Only expectations, and expectations shape interpretation. So a large femur became evidence of giants. A thick skull became inhuman. Scattered bones were assembled incorrectly, and once newspapers entered the picture, restraint vanished entirely because headlines sold stories, not accuracy, spreading phrases like giant human skeleton found and proof of biblical giants, with each retelling adding scale as 6 feet became 7, 7 became 8, and 8 became towering. While verification was rarely mentioned, most bones never preserved, photographed, or studied properly. Some discarded, some crumbled, some misfiled. Many quietly reclassified until trained anatomists examined similar finds and found the truth far less dramatic, that many were animal remains from mammoths, mastodons, and giant ground sloths whose massive femurs and skulls easily resembled something human to the untrained eye. While even bear skeletons caused confusion when reassembled upright, their large skulls and powerful jaws mistaken for human giants. And alongside these errors were real humans who were simply taller than average. Where 7 feet was rare but possible, 7.5 exceptional, and over 8 extremely rare. But real, because these individuals existed throughout history. They were recorded, measured, and sometimes even displayed. And when such a person died and was buried in isolation, their remains could easily shock future discoverers. Because without context, a 7-foot skeleton feels impossible, especially in a world where the average height was closer to 5.5 feet. So the bones told a story, just not the story people wanted. And as scientific methods improved, as carbon dating emerged, as comparative anatomy matured and collections became standardized, the space for giants steadily shrank. Because no verified skeleton ever exceeded known human limits without showing signs of disease, no fossil suggested a separate race of enormous humans, and no DNA hinted at such a lineage. And yet belief persisted, because science did not just remove giants, it removed mystery. And for some that loss was unacceptable. So by the mid-20th century, a new idea took hold, that if giants could not be proven, then perhaps they were being hidden, leading to accusations that museums suppressed evidence, institutions destroyed bones, and governments rewrote history. Even though these claims relied entirely on absence rather than proof, with no catalog numbers, no preserved specimens, no peer-reviewed studies, only stories about stories. And this is where modern giant myths were truly born. Not in ancient times, but in the gap between early mistakes and modern understanding. Because when early reports were disproven, they did not vanish. They transformed, becoming evidence of suppression rather than error. Yet the critical problem remains that science thrives on discovery, that finding a new human species reshapes careers, earns recognition, and rewrites textbooks, meaning there is no incentive to hide giants, only to prove them. And when real discoveries did break expectations, Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo floresiensis, science embraced them because they were strange, unexpected, and world-changing. But they were also real, whereas giants never crossed that threshold, with every path leading back to misunderstanding, misidentification, exaggeration, or pathology, bringing us back to biology itself. Because even if we imagine a population of true giants, evolution becomes the barrier, as large bodies require more energy, more food, more oxygen, and more time to mature, move slower, reproduce less efficiently, and struggle in environments with limited resources, meaning that in a prehistoric world filled with danger, a population of towering humans would not dominate but struggle, because evolution does not favor extremes unless the environment demands them. And for humans it never did, instead favoring endurance, efficiency, and adaptability, making us marathon runners rather than towering brutes, tool users rather than massive predators, leaving giants not as creatures but as transitions, moments where misunderstanding met imagination, where early science met ancient belief, and where the bones of a brutal, oversized world were interpreted through human memory, meaning giants never existed as a race, but did exist as an idea, reinforced by real discoveries that felt too large to explain. And when the explanation finally arrived, it was quieter than the myth, which is why the myth survived. Because even after science stripped giants of their bones, the memory refused to fade, since giants were never sustained by evidence alone, but by something deeper: human psychology. Because humans do not remember the past as it was, but as it felt, and the ancient world felt overwhelming. As for most of our existence, humans lived at the mercy of forces far larger than themselves, whether that could erase communities overnight, animals capable of killing with a single blow, and landscapes so vast and unforgiving they swallowed people without trace, making survival feel borrowed rather than guaranteed. And when survival feels temporary, memory exaggerates instinctively rather than dishonestly, turning giants into symbols of the fear of being small, embodying the sense that the world once belonged to something greater, stronger, and more dominant than us. That before humans ruled the planet, we shared it with beings we could not control, which is why giants are never subtle in myth, but massive, overwhelming, impossible to ignore, because fear does not whisper, it towers. And they endure for another reason as well, because they give shape to loss. As ancient humans watched megafauna vanish, landscapes transform, rivals disappear, and powerful creatures fade into extinction, prompting the question of why, and giants became the answer, explaining why mammoths were gone, why animals grew smaller, why the world felt quieter, turning extinction into narrative, loss into story, and change into meaning, while also absorbing guilt. Because modern humans replaced other human groups, and we do not like to see ourselves as conquerors, so we mythologize those who came before, turning them into giants too large, too wild, too dangerous to coexist with, making their disappearance feel justified or inevitable, allowing us to remember without responsibility, which is why giants are almost always defeated in myth, buried beneath mountains, trapped in caves, cast into the underworld. Their fall marking the rise of order and the moment humanity becomes dominant, while the violence, competition, and slow erasure are quietly skipped, absorbed into symbol rather than memory. Yet something else keeps giants alive: scale itself. Because even today humans are obsessed with size, with tall buildings, massive machines, colossal monuments, measuring success in magnitude, biggest, tallest, strongest, and giants represent the ultimate extreme, the boundary of what we imagine humanity could be. And boundaries fascinate us because they reveal our limits. And while science now tells us clearly that there is no evidence of a separate race of human giants, no verified skeletons, no DNA, no fossils that break biological law, it also tells us something equally important: that humans are storytellers who do not merely record reality, but transform it, compressing thousands of years into symbols the mind can carry. And giants are one of those symbols, not lies, but memories reshaped by fear, wonder, and time. What happens when a small species survives a massive world and tries to explain how, which is why giants will never disappear. Because as long as humans remember a time when the world felt bigger than them, they will imagine beings who were bigger too. Not because they existed exactly as described, but because we needed them to. Because the past is not filled with monsters, it is filled with echoes, and giants are among the loudest. And if you enjoy deep-time documentaries where science meets legend, subscribe to Chronicles of the Past. Like this video if it changed how you see ancient myths. Comment your theory: were giants memory, metaphor, or something more? And share this with someone who still believes giants walk the earth, because history does not lie, it remembers, and then it evolves.